A soldier's return to his roots leads to a powerful family revelation. Gray dawn smeared across the sky like cold ash, casting a muted light over the landscape. Jake Harrison stood at the edge of the overgrown driveway, the rusted truck behind him quietly groaning in the damp air. His worn boots crunched against shattered gravel and tangled roots, sinking slightly into the soft earth. The air was thick, heavy with silence, with memories that refused to settle. Before him, the family farmhouse sat like a shattered relic, windows dark and mullioned frames crooked beneath a sagging roof. Its white paint peeled bitterly, the boards warped and broken like the fragments of a once whole past. A broken fence wove a rotting boundary around wild grass and weeds, gray-green blades twisting like forgotten promises. Jake's hands trembled as he clutched the thin foreclosure notice, its edges curled from rain and time. The cheap paper was cold and creased against his palm, mocking him with stark words, "Auction forthcoming." He flexed his fingers hard until the sting flared through his skin. Behind him, the distant howl of a dog broke the stillness, raw, wary. Somewhere in the shadows beyond the farmstead, life endured. For Jake, it was a sound both alien and achingly familiar, a reminder of the world he'd left behind, the world that perhaps had left him. A gust stirred the dry leaves and dust, swirling across the cracked porch steps worn smooth by decades. Jake stepped forward, boots echoing hollowly in the empty hall as he pushed open the creaking door. The scent hit him first, dust, mildew, and the faint trace of old tobacco smoke. Dust motes drifted in the pale streams of light, suspended silent like delicate ghosts. His eyes scanned the cramped living room, all too familiar and yet strange. An old rocking chair tilted precariously, draped with moth-eaten blankets. A faded photograph hung crooked on the wall, a sepia-toned echo of faces ghosted by time. Jake's gaze fell on the shattered glass of a picture frame resting beside the fireplace, his mother and father, hands entwined, smiles frozen in a happier sun. His voice cracked, a bare whisper in the cavernous quiet, "I'm back." No answer. The floorboards groaned as he moved deeper into the house. A clock on the wall ticked unevenly, its hand stuck between numbers, time broken, just like everything else. The kitchen was a tableau of neglect, rust blooming in dark patches on the sink, bowls chipped and stained. He found an old, leather-bound photo album resting on the wooden table, its pages curled and fragile. Jake gingerly flipped through faces, stared back, moments captured in laughter and light, a silent testament to a life once vibrant. Each photograph was a door to the past, closing softly yet demanding to be opened. His fingers paused over a faded letter, tucked inside the album's spine. The envelope was yellowed and sealed with wax, its surface cracked like the earth outside. A sudden breath caught in Jake's throat. Outside, the wind moaned low, a mournful lullaby weaving through broken fences and hollow barns. Thunder rumbled faintly on the horizon. Jake stood framed in the shadowed doorway, weathered and worn, haunted by ghosts seen and unseen. The house creaked and sighed around him, a vessel of stories tangled in silence. His eyes, bright yet weary, held a distant storm, as if beneath the ruins of his past lay a fierce undiscovered pulsation ember of life, aching to ignite. He folded the foreclosure notice slowly, the paper softening in his grasp. The sun broke momentarily through heavy clouds, spilling light on a cracked windowpane, a single shard catching fire. And in that flicker, the sound of a distant gunshot shattered the fragile quiet, a sudden rupture drawing him back toward an uncertain dawn, where redemption and reckoning awaited beyond. The house seemed to exhale a long, weary sigh, settling deeper into its foundation as dusk bled across the sky. Jake stood alone in the western field, where overgrown grass swayed listlessly, the wind carrying whispers of a past that refused to loosen its grip. The broken fence posts, scarred by weather and time, leaned crooked lion imperfect barrier between what was and what remained. Each splinter, each snapped board mirrored the fractures inside Jake's own spirit. His breath came ragged and shallow, matching the jagged rhythm of a heart wading through a gulf of shame and regret. The rough fabric of his worn combat jacket scratched against his skin as he pulled his shoulders inward, as if trying to shield himself from the ghosts and echoes carried on the chilling breeze. Silence was the only companion here, vast and suffocating. The sun had begun its slow descent, staining the horizon with sickly hues of gray and blue, colors that reflected the heaviness pressing against Jake's chest. His eyes, deep and shadowed, caught reflections in the cracked glass of a nearby tractor window, faint glimmers of a man struggling to reconcile his battered past with an uncertain future. A sudden rustle in the nearby trees made him turn sharply, muscles coiled beneath worn jeans and old boots. But it was only a flock of crows, their black wings slicing through the air with uneasy intent, sounding a discordant caw that seemed to mimic the turmoil inside him. Jake's gaze dropped to the cold earth beneath his feet, where footprints from days long gone had faded into indistinct smudges. The land was aching, neglected like him, holding memories as heavy as the weight in his throat. He knelt slowly beside a broken fence post, running fingers over the rough, splintered wood. It felt fragile, threatened, yet persistent, a surviving fragment of family, of history he barely understood. The distant lowing of cattle no longer heard, the fading clatter of farm machinery provided a hollow soundtrack, each sound a small testament to decline. His ears caught the faint creak of the barn's old timbers, groaning under the burden of abandonment. Suddenly overcome with a surge of anger and self-loathing, Jake's clenched fists pounded against his thighs. His voice, hoarse and raw, broke into the trembling quiet. Why am I even here? What's left for me in this forgotten place? The wind snatched the words away, carrying them out across the desolation, unanswered. He staggered to his feet, each step unsteady yet deliberate, as if fighting the pull of invisibility threatening to swallow him whole. The earth beneath him was cracked and weary, mirroring the fissures spreading through his own resolve. His tired eyes scanned the horizon again, catching sight of the faded outline of the farmhouse against the darkening sky. There was something in the silhouette, a stubborn hold on existence that stirred a flicker deep inside him. Perhaps it was defiance, perhaps vestiges of hope. Slowly, Jake turned back toward the house, swallowed by the lengthening shadows, each footfall a tentative claim to a story yet unfinished. And amidst the encroaching darkness, a single glint reflected off something half-buried near the porch steps, a forgotten, rusted key, buried in dust and neglect. The flicker was small, but unmistakable. The night deepened, the farmhouse standing silently in vigil. Within Jake, the first fragile stirrings of a journey reluctant and raw began to pulse, hint that beneath the scars and silence, a truth waited to be unearthed. The attic was a sanctuary of dust and fragmented light, where the beams of the waning sun filtered weakly through gaps in the weathered roof, casting elongated shadows on forgotten relics. Jake Harrison's boots disrupted a delicate web of cobwebs as he climbed the narrow, creaking staircase, every step a cautious surrender to the weight of memories trapped within these walls. The air was thick with the scent of old wood, damp fabric, and something indefinable, lost time, perhaps, or whispered secrets waiting patiently to be unraveled. His fingers brushed against stacked wooden crates and battered trunks, each a silent repository of vanished laughter, sorrow, and the shifting tides of generations past. Amid the relics, a leather-bound box, faded and cracked, caught his eye, a contrast of fragility and promise. Drawn like a moth to a flame, Jake knelt down, the roughness of splintered floorboards pressing against his knees as he pried the box open with deliberate care. Inside lay a letter, its edges yellowed and sealed with trembling dignity. The ink, though faded, retained a sense of urgency and sorrow. Jake's heartbeat quickened as he broke the seal, the act a threshold to a path unknown. As the parchment unfolded, the stillness of the attic deepened, the only sound a soft sigh expelled from his lips, the reverberation of a whispered truth pressing against the silence. The letter unfolded a narrative laced with love, betrayal, and concealed sacrifice, a hidden chapter of his family's history neither he nor the world had been privy to. There were names intertwined with promises unkept, shadows cast over a bond severed by circumstance and choice. The words pulled Jake beneath their tide, stirring grief and the fragile stirrings of hope. Outside the attic window, the sky reddened as sun dipped toward the horizon, casting the barren fields into a cloak of twilight blues and grays. The broken fences on the edge of the property, ghosts of former boundaries, seemed to echo the fractures revealed in the letter's fragile script. Jake's eyes glistened, brimming with tears unbidden yet cathartic. He traced the lines of the letter repeatedly, each word a shard of connection he had long craved, each phrase a thread that wove a tapestry of identity fractured but not irrevocably lost. The house creaked alive around him, memories converging in the fading light, the warmth of his mother's laughter, the stern gaze of his father, and now, the quiet bravery etched in ink and paper. A slow breath wheezed through Jake's lips, steadying his pounding heart. The weight of shame and abandonment that had pressed against his chest softened imperceptibly, replaced by the fragile embers of purpose. In this attic, amid dust and silence, the scattered pieces of his life began to coalesce into something new, a quest not only to understand the past but to reclaim his fractured self. Below, the earth awaited, whispering of roots and renewal hidden beneath broken fences and forgotten soil. With a final glance at the letter, Jake folded it carefully and tucked it close to his heart. His silhouette, outlined in the attic's failing light, stood taller warrior, son, seeker poised on the cusp of a journey that would unearth truths as old and tangled as the land itself. The dusk settled gently, cloaking the farm in a muted embrace, yet the air thrummed with the quiet electricity of what was to come where shadows held stories, and the past beckoned with both pain and promise. A pale mist clung to the neglected farm, shrouding broken fence posts and wild tangles of overgrown grass in an eerie, softened veil. As dawn nudged against the horizon, the muted light spilled across the faded farmhouse, cutting fractured bands of gray and blue through the lingering cold air. Jake Harrison's breath curled in short, ragged gusts, the harsh chill biting through his worn military jacket. His boots sank slightly into the damp earth, the same earth that mourned neglected fields and years of quiet unraveling. The smell of decayed timber, damp soil, and faint smoke from a distant wood stove lingered like a specter. Jake's weary eyes roved over the shattered windows and sagging porch, each damaged board a relic of loss. His hands, rough and calloused, clenched and unclenched at his sides. With slow, deliberate steps, he moved toward the remainder of a rusted tractor half swallowed by weeds, its metal creaking softly under the breath of the morning wind. The fractured fence nearby swayed in creaking rhythm, the broken rails a scar that mirrored the fractures within his own story. The broken fences were more than wood, they were the splintered bonds of a fading lineage. As Jake thumbed through his pocket, he felt the smooth curve of a letter's edge, forgotten in the attic but heavy with promise. He withdrew the envelope carefully, the paper brittle, lined with age and time's neglect. The seal was unbroken but fragile, whispering of secrets long held beneath layers of dust and denial. He hesitated, tension tightening around his chest like a steel band. His fingers trembled slightly before breaking the seal, releasing a faint sigh of forgotten breaths exhaled into the still rural air. Unfolding the letter, Jake's gaze flickered across faded inkwords steeped in emotion, regrets, and quiet revelations. The letter spoke of family rifts concealed beneath polite silences, of truths too painful to utter yet too vital to bury forever. It pulled at the edges of his heart, one tethered to a past he wished to forget, the other a key to understanding who he was and where he belonged. Thunder murmured far away, the sky darkening with the promise of rain as clouds gathered slow and heavy, mirroring the weight settling deep in Jake's mind. The first droplets fell, sharp and cold, splattering onto cracked window panes and rotting wood, releasing the earthy fragrance of a cleansing yet to come. Jake's voice was low and hollow, almost swallowed by the storm. What else lies buried here? Lightning flared briefly through a rotting barn window, casting fractured shadows that danced like memories on the walls. The storm's growl grew nearer, echoing the growing tempest within him, stirring of questions, the pull toward revelation. He wiped sweat and rain from his brow, thoughts fragmenting between past failings and the uncertain pull of renewal. The farm, scarred and abandoned, was a mirror to his soul, wounded yet refusing to cease its pulse. Another step forward, and the rusty hinges of the old cellar door groaned softly, inviting, ominous. Jake's fingers brushed the letter once more, a talisman against the gray that threatened to consume him. With a steadying breath, he stepped into the gathering storm, the path ahead shrouded but unmistakably calling. The fractured fences stood mute, witnesses to a journey just beginning, a fragile fight between surrender and the first stirring of hope. The sun slanted low as the afternoon waned, casting long shadows across the cracked earth and withered fields of the Harrison farm. Jake moved with determined steps, though the weight of years and invisible wounds bore heavily on his shoulders. Each broken fence board he passed was a jagged reminder not just of crumbled family ties, but the fractured pieces within himself. His fingers brushed coarse grass and deftly pushed aside a fallen branch as he ventured deeper into the overgrown orchard. The air was thick with the scent of damp soil and decaying leaves, a pungent tapestry of neglect and resilience. Somewhere farther off, a crow cawed a sharp, lonely sound that seemed to echo Jake's own isolation. In his pocket, the letter remained a folded secret. Each time he glanced at it, its edges creased further in his grasp, as if the fragile paper absorbed the turmoil within. Jake's movements halted suddenly beyond the barn, where the rusted remnants of a pickup truck stood sentinel amid wildflower spikes. The neighbor's property loomed just yards away, a boundary not easily crossed. He noticed fresh tire marks cutting through the mud signs someone had passed here recently. Tension clung thick as fog when an unfamiliar voice cracked the silence from the edge of the tree line. It was Jim, a stooped man with lined eyes and dry hands, known locally for his hard-nosed views and wariness of outsiders. "You back to kick up old ghosts, or just lost?" Jim called, his tone edged with bitterness and warning. Jake hesitated. The words stung, but he met the distrust with quiet steadiness. "I'm here to understand. To make peace." Jim snorted, stepping closer, his posture guarded. "Peace? This place don't offer peace to those who dig where they shouldn't. You want to know your past, be ready for what breaks the ground, son." The exchange felt like a gauntlet thrown, one Jake could neither deflect nor ignore. As the day waned, Jake found himself wandering toward the old well, once the heart of the farm, now nothing but a hollow mouth swallowing shadows. Kneeling by its cracked stones, he revealed a rusted tin box hidden beneath the tangled roots. Inside lay a faded photo album, its cover torn, the pages brittle with age. He opened it slowly, each snapshot a silent testament. Childhood birthdays consumed by smiles faded with time, gatherings bursting with life now frozen beneath dust. Faces of relatives he barely remembered stared back, some joyful, some strained, all caught in moments of irrevocable change. Amid the photographs, a torn piece of paper slipped free, the edge scorched, its content fragmentary but telling. Names crossed through, dates altered, signatures blurred. Secrets once buried now haunted the edges of his world. As twilight folded the farm into blue-black, Jake felt the gravity of his discoveries weighing heavier. Whispered memories turned to cries of forgotten betrayals and love twisted by silence. Returning to the house, shadows played tricks on the walls, the empty halls stretching long and cold. The board creaked ominously beneath his feet, a reminder that time wore thin, patience frayed. The letter in his pocket burned quietly against his skin, a seed of truth set to crack the surface. Jake's voice, barely a touched whisper amid the encroaching night, confessed to the emptiness. What else lies beneath the soil? No answer came. Only the solemn embrace of the farmhouse and the distant, wary call of a lonely owl. The farm's secrets seemed to hold their breath, waiting for the reckoning to come. And in that charged silence, Jake stood at a precipice, a moment poised between surrender and discovery, haunted yet unwilling to retreat. The sky hung heavy, a low ceiling of steel-gray clouds swallowing the landscape beneath. A cool drizzle seeped through the skeletal frame of the old barn, tapping a morose rhythm on rusted metal and cracked wooden beams. Jake Harrison stood amid the decay, his breath misting in the cold air, fingers trembling as he held a crumpled, yellowed document discovered beneath loose floorboards, a will, a declaration of secrets, and fractured promises. His eyes were shadows, heavy with exhaustion and weight. The farm around him seemed to lean inward, pressed down by the gravity of history and betrayal. The broken fences, once a simple partition, now spoke volumes, lines drawn and redrawn over years of distance and silence. The fragments of family fractured not just by time, but by withheld truths and buried pain. Jake's hands clenched the paper tight, knuckles blanching, as the words etched themselves beneath his skin. Names crossed out, fortunes reconsidered, and a revelation that fractured the fragile understanding he had held about his lineage and himself. The letter that had seemed a promise of revelation was instead a poison-laced wound. It spoke of rivalries buried beneath polite facades, betrayals sharp as shattered glass, and a father whose absence cast longer shadows than the years themselves. Each sentence trickled like cold water, unraveling Jake's foundation. A sudden gust tore through the barn's open door, sending loose debris skittering across the dirt floor. The chill was skeletal, cutting to the core, mirroring the void swelling within him. His breath hitched in a strangled gasp as the magnitude of truth slammed against him. His family's sanctity was a carefully guarded lie, his place in it a lie too. The fragment of a forgotten letter burned like an ember rekindled, igniting a fusion of sorrow and fury. The rain increased, sluicing through the gaps, each drop a stinging reminder of isolation. Shadows deepened in the corners, swallowing the light as if nature itself mourned with him. Harrison, a voice, rough and loaded with cold judgment, cut through the heavy air. Jake spun, finding himself face to face with the neighbor who had cast wary, disapproving eyes upon his presence days earlier, a man whose gaze seemed to pierce the veil of time and history. "You've dug too deep," the neighbor warned, his tone a brittle whisper weighted with secrets. "Some stones better left unturned." Jake's voice barely rose above the storm, fierce and trembling. "The truth deserves daylight." No more silence. An exhausted silence hung between them, the tension a taut wire stretched thin over years of concealed pain and resentment. Turning back to the fluttering pages, Jake felt the fractures within his soul peel apart, lost connections bleeding into the present, the weight of old wounds aching anew. That night, beneath a bruised sky, Jake sat beside the broken fence, tracing the splintered wood with calloused fingers. The letter lay open in his lap, its words a relentless tide washing over fragmented memories. "I am no longer who I thought I was," he murmured, voice raw. The wind whispered back, weaving through shattered rails and fallen leaves, a mournful chorus for a man caught between past betrayals and the uncertain dawn of self. Beneath the canopy of blackened clouds, Jake Harrison's story fractured but flickered with fragile defiance caught between desolation and the stirring promise of reckoning. At the edge of night, the once-forgotten secrets threatened to consume him but also to set him free. The sky was a weighty canvas of swollen, ash-gray clouds, pressing low over the stripped branches and sagging rooftops of the Harrison farm. Rain fell in resigned torrents, cold and unyielding, drumming a relentless dirge on the cracked windowpanes of the decaying farmhouse. Inside, the air was stale and thick with the scent of damp wood and forgotten memories, a suffocating stillness punctuated only by Jake Harrison's ragged breath. He sat slumped on the ragged floorboards of the attic, knees drawn up to his chest, the frail letter folded but not forgotten in his trembling hand. The dim light filtered weakly through the grimy window, casting spectral patterns on dust motes that floated listlessly in the heavy gloom. Outside, the world blurred into muted blue and gray, shadows merging with rain-soaked earth. Jake's gaze was hollow, a glassy void reflecting the fractured fragments of his family's history and the shattered remnants of his own identity. The weight of revelation pressed down on him like iron shackles, each secret uncovered another link dragging him deeper into the darkness. The broken fences surrounding the farm, once lines of division between neighbors, now seemed to echo the rift tearing through Jake's heart, a testament to love estranged and trust broken. He ran a weary hand over his scruffy beard, despondence etched into every line of his rugged face. Memory and pain intertwined as whispers of the past rose like ghosts. Whispered arguments behind closed doors, letters hidden from sight, faces of kin who had vanished into silence. The old photo albums lay strewn across the attic floor, their curled pages fragile with age, photographs faded and smeared snapshots of a family irreparably fragmented. The room felt impossibly small, the ceiling low, pressing inward as if to smother him beneath the weight of unresolved grief and uncertainty. Jake's breath quickened, shallow and uneven, mirroring the storm raging beyond the fragile glass. His voice, cracked and barely audible, broke the silence. "What have you done to us?" No answer came, only the persistent tapping of rain and the distant rumble of thunder rolling through the skies. The cold seeped into his bones, each second stretching, a slow unraveling of resolve and hope. He dropped the letter, its fragile folds now scattered on the dusty floor like promises torn apart. The old photograph in his hand slipped and fluttered down, landing face UPA faded image of his father, stern and distant, eyes masking untold stories. In that moment, Jake felt himself fracturing, the weight of years and wounds too deep to bear threatening to swallow the last flickers of strength. The farmhouse creaked and sighed around him, a hollow monument to broken dreams and lost time. Outside, the rain intensified, a relentless cascade erasing footprints, washing away traces, as if nature itself tried to drown the past. Jake stared blankly ahead, the shadows pooling at the edges of his vision, the world blurring at the seams. Each breath a ragged plea, every heartbeat a drum signaling descent as the fragile threads holding him together snapped under the burden. And as the storm's fury battered the silent earth, Jake Harrison sank into the depths of solitude and despair, a man lost amid the ruins of family and self, teetering on the edge of unraveling. The farmhouse was swallowed by the creeping dusk, its broken windows, blank eyes staring out onto a land ravaged by neglect and silence. Jake Harrison sat on the cracked wooden floor of the empty kitchen, the faint chill of the evening seeping slowly into his bones. His worn jacket hung off his shoulders, the frayed edges of his military shirt visible beneath, a faded symbol of battles both internal and external. Outside, a cold wind carried the scent of damp earth and rotting leaves, weaving through the creaking, hollow shells of once vibrant barns and fences. The broken fence looked jagged against the darkening sky, silent witnesses to a fracture that had spread beyond wood and wire, into blood and memory. Jake's hands trembled as they clutched a faded photograph torn from one of the scattered albums he had found earlier. The image was blurred by time and water stains, but a woman's smile shone faintly, haunting in its warmth a ghost of a past he couldn't reach. His eyes burned, redrimmed and glassy, tracing the contours of the faded smiles and familiar faces that seemed to taunt him with the fragility of connection lost. Every echo of laughter now felt like betrayal, every ghost a reminder of abandonment. The walls around him seemed to contract, the shadows stretching long and suffocating, swallowing the dim light of a lantern flickering on the worn counter. Each breath was heavy, a labored song that resonated with the hollow silence. The house creaked and groaned under the weight of years, the plaster peeling like shedding skin, revealing scars beneath. The steady rattling of the loose window pane whispered a cold lament, as if the very bones of the house mourned alongside him. Jake's voice was barely a breath, choked with grief and exhaustion. What remains when the bonds we hold unravel? His hands slowly released the photograph, the image fluttering to the floor like a wounded bird, landing softly on the faded linoleum. The sound felt impossibly loud in the stillness, a fragile symbol of things slipping through his grasp. The darkness deepened and the cold pressed inward, carrying with it the weight of memories too heavy to bear. The silence stretched taut, pierced only by the distant, mournful call of a lone crow circling over the barren fields. Knees drawn close, Jake rocked gently as if to smooth the ragged edges of his broken spirit. The faint glow from the dying lantern illuminated his weary face, the lines etched by pain and regret telling stories no words could capture. The room felt vast and empty, a cavern hollowed by loss, echoes of a past ripped apart by secrets and regret. And as the night closed its dark embrace around the shattered home and the broken man within, Jake Harrison surrendered to the abyss of silence, lost in despair, on the edge of fading. The attic was swallowed in darkness, faint shafts of twilight filtering in through the cracked window panes and shaking the clouds like distant warning bells. Jake sat hunched on the splintered floorboards among the scattered relics, dusty photo albums, brittle papers, and the lingering scent of old wood and forgotten stories. His hands trembled as they held the jagged edges of the torn letter, ink smeared and worn, like the fragile thread connecting him to the past. The weight of betrayal and loss pressed heavily on his chest, the paneled walls seemingly closing in, breathing a cold, suffocating silence that echoed the emptiness within. The broken fences outside, silhouetted against the fading light, etched fractured lines through the sprawling fields, much like the cracks spreading across Jake's sense of self. He pressed a palm to the scar on his cheek. It ached with the histories unspoken, the ghosts he struggled to face. A stray breeze whispered through the crack in the attic window, rustling loose papers and breathing life into the stillness. Among them, a single photograph slipped free and fluttered to the floor like a fallen leaf. Jake's weary eyes caught that fragile movement, fixing on the imagery, a faded family portrait where smiles mingled with the heavy weight of unspoken truths. The silent faces seemed to reach out, both accusing and yearning. His breath hitched, the fragile spark of remembrance flickering within, a pulse barely felt beneath layers of grief and regret. The glint from the old, weathered metal tucked in his jacket caught the last shimmer of daylight, a defiant glimmer amid the encroaching gloom. In that moment, a voice, faint and almost imperceptible, echoed in the recesses of his mind. Words from his childhood, a memory stirred by the scent of aged paper and the scratches of a pencil on brittle canvas. Roots run deep, even when buried beneath the hardest soil. Jake's lips parted, releasing a breath laden with both pain and fragile resolve. The darkness around him did not ease, but within that silence, a quiet seed of clarity took root, a fragile chance to piece together the shattered mosaic of his history. His gaze lifted to the window, where the last embers of sunset bled into the horizon, casting long, tentative shadows over the land. Somewhere behind him, The echoes of old laughter mingled with the sigh of the wind through broken fences, a sound both haunting and hopeful. Alara's silhouette, weary yet unbowed, became a portrait of endurance, a man standing at the precipice between despair and renewal. The night deepened, yet within the fragile enclave of his soul, a trembling light began to pulse, subtle, uncertain, but unmistakably alive. And as the attic held its breath, cradling the weight of untold stories, Jake Harrison's journey was no longer one adrift in darkness, but one poised to find its way back to the light. The early morning sun filtered through the broken slats of the barn roof, scattering golden fragments of light across a floor strewn with dust and forgotten memories. Jake Harrison sat cross-legged amidst the faded photographs and yellowed pages of a weathered journal, his grandfather's, discovered tucked away in the attic alongside the letter that had sparked his restless journey. The air felt lighter here, as if the dawn's touch was nudging a world long steeped in sorrow towards renewal. The broken fences that once spoke only of division and decay now trembled softly in a gentle breeze, their fractured lines catching faint glimmers of dawn's promise. Jake's rough fingers traced the curved script in the journal, eyes narrowing with a quiet hunger for understanding. Each word was a thread stitching together tales of resilience, hardship, and love laced with pain, but never losing the stubborn spark of hope that must have kept his lineage alive through darkest storms. His scarred cheek flushed as the shadows around him softened, his breath slow and intentional. The relentless weight of shame that had buried him began to shift as though the past, with all its betrayal and silence, could yield fragments of grace. A sparrow's song rose softly in the warming air, delicate and defiant. It fluttered against the chill still lingering in the corners of the barn, a fragile herald of fragile new beginnings. Jake set the journal gently aside and looked out through the broken barn door. Beyond, the wild grasses swayed, kissed by dew and light, the farm slowly waking in hesitant color from a long and troubled slumber. The quiet breeze carried distant voices, the hum of a waking world, and with it, the whisper that perhaps forgiveness might not be surrender but a quiet strength, a way forward beyond the fractures. He exhaled, a breath carrying both release and resolve. "Maybe it's not too late," he murmured, voice low, a vow amidst the rustling leaves. The sun climbed higher, spilling light over weathered wood and tangled vines, tracing golden paths where shadows once held court. Jake stood, a figure shaped by loss but not defined by it, stepped into the fragile dawn, the weight of the past balanced by a whispered promise that change was possible. And in the softened light, the farm no longer seemed a relic of forgotten pain but a canvas for healing, a place where broken fences might falter but new roots could still take hold. The story, like the day, was just beginning to unfurl its wings, fragile, uncertain, but alive with the first stirrings of hope. The wind rushed across the desolate fields, weaving through the splintered fence posts and whipping the wild grass against Jake's weathered boots. The farm, still bearing the scars of time and neglect, stood as a rugged testament to forgotten years and fractured memories. Yet in that chaotic beauty, Jake found the pulse of something stirring within himself, a fragile resolve rising against the weight of despair. He approached the boundary where the neighbor's land began, a narrow dirt path flanked by trees whose twisted branches seemed to claw at the low-hanging gray sky. The air brimmed with tension, a brittle stillness hanging like a loaded breath. From the shadowed tree line, the neighbor emerged, an older man with sunburnt skin etched by countless seasons and hardened by grudges long held. His eyes, cold and unreadable, locked onto Jake's with wary suspicion. Without hesitation, Jake met that gaze with steady calm. "We don't have to be enemies," he said quietly, voice rough but certain. "There's truth buried here, something bigger than old grudges. I'm willing to listen, to understand." The neighbor's expression flickered, a spark of recognition or maybe uncertainty. He shifted, restless, then nodded tersely. "Truth's a dangerous thing around here. You dig too deep. It unearths wounds best left to bleed out in silence. Jake pressed on, determined. Ignoring it hasn't healed those wounds. We both know the fences are broken, not just the ones out there. For a long moment, neither moved, the wind carrying their silent exchange into the wilderness. Then the neighbor's stance softened, a fragile truce in the quiet breath between. Moved by this tacit concession, Jake turned back toward the barn where, in faded light, lay scattered more fragments of his family's life. Faded newspaper clippings, brittle letters, and photographs marred by time and lost smiles. He knelt, sifting through remnants of laughter and sorrow. His father's face emerged from a cracked frame, eyes intense and unreadable. Jake's fingers lingered on the photo, an unspoken connection across decades. As the sun broke through a heavy veil of cloud, shards of light pierced the fading darkness of the barn. The golden warmth spilled onto Jake's face, bathing him in a glow both surreal and grounding. The fractured fences outside caught the light, their jagged silhouettes transformed, momentarily whole. In this burst of clarity, Jake folded the faded papers with care, gathering the broken pieces of a fragmented past into his arms. The old house creaked under the forging breezy, an old chorus of resilience. His voice barely cut through the stirred quiet. This farm, this family, it's not just ruins. It's a beginning. The first real smile since his return tugged at the corner of his lips, tentative but genuinely a flicker of light amid long shadows. In that moment, the loss etched into his soul began to soften, replaced by the tentative bloom of hope. The earth beneath him, cracked but alive, promised that even the deepest wounds held the secret to renewal. And as the sun slowly climbed, painting the sky with streaks of pale gold and soft blues, Jake Harrison stepped forward, his heart a fragile drumbeat driving toward healing, toward reclaimed identity. The farm, burdened but unbroken, was the silent witness to a transformation begun, a journey from isolation to reconciliation. The horizon stretched wide, endless, holding the promise of stories still waiting to be told. The sun hung low yet steadfast, bleeding molten gold across the weathered fields, casting long, luminous shadows upon the fractured land. Jake Harrison stood atop the ridge overlooking the farmstead, the contours of the worn earth spread out beneath him like an open wound slowly stitching itself whole. The broken fences that once scarred the landscape now shimmered faintly in the dying light, fractured lines etched into a vast canvas of enduring patience. His silhouette, sturdy and upright against the amber sky, was a living testament to transformation, each scar on his weathered face a map of battles fought both without and within. The frayed edges of his jacket, softened by years of wear, caught patches of sunlight, breathing warmth into symbols of weariness and resilience. Around him, the farm breathed soft, lithe, gentle rustle of reclaimed fields, the distant call of cow and crow carrying across the breeze, the old barn standing resolute despite sagging timbers and moss-clad shingles. The faded photo albums and brittle letters he had uncovered seemed less like relics now, more like threads woven back into the fabric of his life. His hand, steady despite the tremors of his past, pulled the tattered letter from his jacket pocket, a tangible thread to the hidden stories once lost beneath silence and shame. He unfolded it fully beneath the setting sun, the golden hues casting the aged paper in a sacred glow. Jake's voice was a measured murmur, infused with clarity and release. The past is heavy, but it does not have to break us. A breeze stirred the leaves at his feet, scattering fragments of memory and dust. The farmland, once a wilderness of neglect, shimmered in response, symbol of life destined to renew. At the edge of the ridge, the neighbor's silhouette appeared no longer a shadowed adversary but a somber reminder of old wounds and tentative truths. Their eyes met, a silent exchange passing deeper than words. Not all broken ties could be mended, but acknowledgement was a balm still. The old porch creaked under Jake's slow steps as he descended, each one a deliberate act of reclamation. Entering the farmhouse, he paused in the doorway, eyes tracing the path sunlight drew through the dust motes, illuminating the worn floor like a cathedral of possibility. He approached the trunk where the photo albums rested and ran fingers lightly across the faded covers, reverence and forgiveness mingling in his gaze. The photographs within held smiles now tempered with understanding, wounds softened by time and grace. With a deep breath, Jake placed the letter back in its resting place, a promise renewed to seek truth, to walk forward with open heart and steady courage. Outside, the sky darkened gently, dusk welcoming the stars that shimmered softly, a silent choir witnessing the emergence of a man reborn from desolation. In the garden's quiet embrace, Jake knelt beside a weary sapling, hands trembling as he planted it deep within the soil, a symbol of hope and growth, a living memorial to forgiveness and continuity. Above, the final rays of sun stretched like healing hands over the horizon, a radiant benediction upon the land and the soul reclaimed. Jake stood, eyes lifted to the unfolding night, calm in the certainty of his path, ready to face whatever shadows yet lingered with the strength of a man fully transformed. The farm, the past, and the future converged in that radiant silence where redemption whispered and peace took root. The sun settled low in the sky, bathing the farmhouse and rolling fields in a tender, amber light that softened the rough edges of a place weathered by time and sorrow. Jake Harrison stood quietly on the porch, the faint creak of the old wood beneath his boots the only sound penetrating the warm silence. The air was fragrant with the subtle scent of wild grass and earth, mingling with the distant, rhythmic chirping of crickets announcing the evening. His gaze wandered across the fractured fences that zigzagged uncertainly across the land, their broken slats and leaning posts a poignant metaphor etched in wood. They were scars of a family divided, yet in the dusk's gentle embrace, they also whispered of endurance and quiet hope. Jake's hand moved slowly, brushing over the frayed edges of his worn jacket, his fingers tracing lines that told stories of countless battles, both internal and abroad. The weight of memories, heavy but now more bearable, seemed to settle deeper into the fabric, mingling with a newfound resilience. He turned inward, eyes closing briefly as breath lengthened, grounding him in the moment. The furrow of pain across his brow softened, replaced by a faint but sincere calm, as if the past and present were entwining no longer in conflict, but in a tentative reconciliation. Inside the quiet house, the photo albums rested on a sturdy oak table, their worn covers weathered by countless hands. Jake approached them and opened a carefully preserved album, fingertips dancing over the faded images of family gatherings, moments frozen in laughter and light. Though the faces were smeared by time, the essence of connection endured, a fragile thread tying him to roots long neglected. He lingered over a photograph of two boys beside a tractor, a young version of himself and a shadowed figure he found both distant and dear. The image breathed life into years of silence, allowing a small smile to crease his weary lips. The letter he found in the attic lay folded beside the album, a bridge between generations. He reached out, his fingers hovering over the papery surface, a tangible symbol of hidden truths now let free. The sun's last light shimmered across its folds, imparting a warmth that reached beyond ink and parchment. Jake stepped back onto the porch, watching as the horizon swallowed golden hues, the sky deepening to velvet shades embroidered with the first stars. The farm exhaled beneath this quiet majesty, an ancient land holding fast to stories of loss, forgiveness, and unexpected grace. He breathed deeply, the soft wind brushing over his face and tousling his unkempt hair, carrying away the last whispers of doubt. In that moment, the unbearable ache softened a gentle acceptance amidst the sprawling vastness of belonging and identity yet to be fully claimed. His silhouette stood stalwart as the warm darkness embraced the world around him, a man shaped by scars yet defined not by them but by the unyielding pulse of redemption. And as the night rose to meet the earth, Jake Harrison held close the fragile peace that had begun to take root, a quiet before the journey's next fragile step. The farmhouse settled into a gentle quiet as twilight folded itself around the rolling hills and weathered fences. Jake Harrison sat on the porch steps, the worn wood cool beneath his hands, fingers tracing the grain as if searching for stories hidden just beneath the surface. The air was soft, crisp with the hues of fading daylight and carried the subtle scent of earth and new growth, a whispered promise written into the air. His eyes lifted to the horizon, where the sky bled slow strokes of amber and lavender, colors deep and tender enough to cradle 1,000 secrets. The fading light caught the edges of a photo album resting beside him, its pages fluttering gently in the evening breeze, a gentle rustle that felt like the ghost of a lost voice now finding its way through time. Jake's gaze softened as he opened the album, the photographs worn, yet vivid with captured moments of laughter and warmth that once lingered here. Faces smiled out from the sepia-toned Pageshi's mother's warm eyes, his father's guarded smile reminders of bonds severed yet not erased. Each picture was a bridge between past hurt and the fragile thread of forgiveness that dared to grow anew. He pressed a finger lightly against a faded image of a younger self, standing beside a worn fence half consumed by wild vines. The broken fences had long symbolized the fragmentation of family, but as he traced their worn lines, he now saw beyond fracture a fragile foundation awaiting renewal. His hand brushed over the letter from the attic, worn and folded carefully beside the album. The ink, faded but steadfast, still held the weight of confessions and concealed truths. The letter's words echoed softly in his mind, a quiet surrender to the complexity of love and pain woven into his heritage. Jake closed his eyes, inhaling deeply the scent of the land mingled with faint traces of old paper and memories. The heaviness that once anchored his heart began to lift, replaced by a tender lightness born of acceptance and release. The scars beneath his skin, the invisible wounds carried from war and history, no longer defined him. They were threads woven into a larger tapestry of resilience. A soft gust stirred the leaves of a nearby maple tree, its vibrant red leaves kissed by the slanting sun, shimmering like flames against the cooling earth. The tree stood tall and resolute, a living emblem of growth through seasons still turning. He whispered into the dusk, voice steady and filled with grace. Maybe forgiveness isn't forgetting, but choosing to carry the weight differently. The fading light cast long, honeyed shadows across the porch as a figure emerged slowly down the lane, an old friend, their silhouette framed against the amber sky. The presence was quiet but profound, a living bridge spanning the gap between despair and hope. Jake rose, the movement slow but certain, and stepped forward to meet this unexpected visitor. Their eyes met, a silent exchange heavy with understanding, sparks of unspoken words offering a pathway back from solitude. Around them, the farm breathed gently beneath the twilight canopy, every whispered wind and rustling leaf singing a lullaby of healing and renewal. The broken fences still stood, but for the first time in years, they felt less like barriers and more like the framework of a story being mended. As the sun dipped below the horizon, spilling molten gold across the sky, a quiet peace settled over the land and man, a Lycia peace born not from erasure but from courage to embrace the shadows and the light. And in that gentle twilight, Jake Harrison found himself poised on the edge of a new dawn, ready to rebuild, to forgive, to live. The sky was a canvas painted in hues of fading amber and soft lavender, the delicate light of dusk weaving a tapestry over the rejuvenated farm. Jake Harrison stooped low, hands steady and worn as they gently splayed the soil beside the weathered porch, earth once barren, now fertile with promise. Cradled in his palms, the sapling was slender and fragile, its roots seeking to grasp and grow amidst the shadows of an ancient world. Around him, the farm exhaled in quiet rebirth. The broken fences that once stood jagged and broken now bore patches of fresh wood, the seams joining imperfect but sincere. The rusted creak of the barn echoed softly, no longer a hollow relic but a sentinel to a story reclaimed. The air carried the mingled scents of damp earth and new growth, a symphony of spring and nostalgia. Jake carried in his gaze the weight of years' scars, both seen and unseen, and yet, in that moment, his eyes were bright with something near to peace. The metal, once hidden deep beneath his ragged jacket, rested now on the wooden bench, a silent witness shimmering faintly in the slanting light. It had transformed from a forgotten token to a beacon of resilience, a symbol that transcended wars and wounds alike. The old photograph albums lay open nearby, pages fluttering gently with the evening breeze. Faces caught in smiles and sunlight smiled back, their frozen joy a bridge across generations. The shadows that had once cloaked these memories now retreated, replaced by a patient glow. Jake rose slowly, planting the sapling firmly, his hands steady as if sowing peace itself into the earth. His gaze lifted to the horizon where the last glow of the sun dissolved, leaving a tranquil embrace of blue and silver. In the distance, the silhouette of a lone tree stood, its branches sprawling wide, a sentinel of endurance and life. That tree, older than memory, whispered of time's continuum and the cycles of loss and rebirth. A gentle breeze brushed through the fields, carrying with it the delicate rustle of leaves and the sigh of a landscape healing. The farm, once a symbol of fractured dreams and whispered secrets, had begun the slow, arduous dance toward renewal. Jake's breath lingered in the cool evening air, calm and deliberate. He reached up, brushing a stray lock of hair from his face, eyes tracing the darkening sky with quiet reverence. The frayed patch on his jacket fluttered softly, a badge no longer of shame but of survival, woven into the fabric of a story reclaimed. And as twilight deepened into night's velvet embrace, the farm settled beneath a canopy of stars, each one a silent sentinel witnessing the promise of peace, growth, and a future unfettered by the shadows of the past. The camera lingered on the newly planted tree, silhouetted against the moon's gentle glow, its sapling branches reaching upward, a fragile yet unbreakable testament. The screen faded softly to black, the final image a quiet benediction, a world healing, a man transformed, a legacy reborn in the fertile soil beneath a vast and endless sky. What would you do with a life-changing letter? Share your thoughts below.